right now, and we can speak to someone who actually first suggested these plans, lawyer Nick Freeman. Nick, good morning.
Morning, Simon.
Nick, you have some history with this then. Why did this all start for you?
To me, it was a sensible thing to do. Cycling is very healthy. We want to encourage as many people as possible to cycle. But we also need cyclists to be law-abiding. And at the moment, we have a system whereby many inner city areas are now 20 miles an hour, and cyclists don't have a speed limit. And to me, that's completely perverse. So cars are being overtaken by cyclists, and the cars are legally compliant, and the cyclists they don't have a speed limit that applies to them. There's no drink drive limit. There's no drug drive limit. There is an offensive driving whilst unfit. We're now living, and last year we had the highest number of serious injuries with cyclists and pedestrians, several hundred. Unfortunately, there were, I think, a couple of fatalities. In terms of fatal injuries, and of course that fatal accidents, that they're extremely rare. There's no legislation in place. We're relying on wanton and furious cycling, an 1861 Offences Against the Persons Act, a maximum sentence 2 years. So the reason I brought this in was because legislation moves on, the times move on, more and more people are cycling, that there are many, many incidents involving cyclists now, and we just need to make everyone responsible and accountable. And if you say, and of course, Anne's absolutely right, if a car hits someone, it's going to cause generally far more damage than a cyclist. And if a car does that, they are accountable because they have a registration plate. They have a means of being made accountable. They go before the courts and they're punished. They might be disqualified, except there's a system in place. For cyclists, there isn't a system in place, unfortunately, because if you're a motorist and you have dash cam footage of a cyclist knocking people down on the pavement, driving on the pavement, jumping red lights, that's all you're left with. You don't have a means of tracing that particular person because you don't have this identification system. So the starting point for me is, and it's to try and avoid the friction that exists at the moment in this country. I mean, we need a massive investment in infrastructure, which the government are really lacking with, but they are, I think, listening. And we need to try and work together, a collaborative approach, instead of, motorists hate cyclists, cyclists hate motorists. I don't actually believe that's true. I think there is a minority of people that actually are causing the problem. And I think there is a resentment by motorists that cyclists just seem to get away scot-free. They seem to have this sense of entitlement. They can do whatever they want, and they're never brought to account, or very rarely. And of course, cyclists are very fragile, they're very vulnerable, and they're fearful, and that's an appalling situation to be in. And motorists need to respect those, and they, of course, have now got the extra protection afforded by the Highway Code, which of course refers to distance when overtaking at different speeds, and also prioritises the most vulnerable. So things are moving, but we need legislation in place to deal with cyclists as well. And that will help them be safer. Anne says she's only seen 10 cyclists in about 10 years, or 8 cyclists in 10 years, go through red lights. I have to say, if you live in a city, you can stand there and you literally see hundreds every day. It's just par for the course, as it is with e-scooters. So all we're saying is we've got limited road space. Unfortunately, we have limited resources. Our aim is to try and make the roads better and safer for everyone, and everybody needs to be legally accountable. And that doesn't mean to say, that's not in any way suggesting that cars cause more damage or lorries cause more damage. Of course they do. But cyclists can cause damage as well to themselves and to other people.
Nick, registration, and this is something that's come up through the discussion of this on the show this morning from many listeners messaging me. Registration number plates don't seem to be preventing car drivers from driving responsibly, do they? So why would they work on bikes?
I'm not saying they would work on bikes. I'm saying what they would do is they'd make the cyclists accountable. You imagine how bad driving would be if you took the registration plates off cars. We don't live in a perfect world. If somebody is cycling or driving and they know actually there's a system of taking them before the courts and punishing them for their actions, then they will cycle or drive in a more responsible way. And that's just fact. It's obvious. It's common sense. And the other point is this: we do need police on our road. We're living in an age now where literally, and I don't want to have a go at the police, but you literally can travel the length of the country and never see a police car. And we need a police presence. And we're reliant on cameras, but we do need a police present to operate as a deterrent, because what the police are doing now is they're relying on motorists to snitch on other motorists with dash cam footage, which one might have a particular point of view in relation to that. It doesn't work for cyclists, because all you have, as I said before, is a cyclist cycling badly. But no accountability, because you can't trace him. You have no means of tracing him. So there's no way of saying to everyone, you're all going to drive perfectly. That's never going to happen. But at least people will be encouraged to, because they won't want to be removed from the road.
Nick, you're a lawyer who you actually first suggested these plans. You put these suggestions to two transport ministers, and you're finally delighted it's finally being looked at. But you actually think this should go further, don't you? There are other concerns you have.
I do.
For cycling.
I do. I think there should be complete parity in legislation with cyclists and motorists, and e-bikes when they start to unravel, and e-scooters. But I go further than that, and I would actually put some responsibility on pedestrians. And I'm not in any way suggesting that pedestrians should have number plates on them, but I would outlaw jaywalking, and I would also introduce a law that prevents pedestrians from crossing the road whilst using a mobile phone or listening to music or having headphones on. And it's not to try and restrict people, but it's just to try and make people safer. And at the pedestrians at the moment, with the new highway code, can literally, at a junction, step out in front of a car, and it's their priority. Okay, so everybody else has to be very vigilant. In my view, pedestrians also need to assume some responsibility, and I think by introducing these measures, it will make it easier and safer for them, and of course for all other road users, because we know, first of all, they're going to be in designated areas, and secondly, they're going to be watching and listening instead of being glued to their phone or their music.
This is an obvious question, Nick, and I'm sure everyone wants me to ask it, and I'm sure you've been asked it a million times. Do you cycle?
I do. Not regularly, but I do cycle. We've got about 3 cycles in the shed. I cycle on country lanes, but I have to say, I don't feel it's safe. I feel it's particularly dangerous. I have, in fact, cycled in London with Dave Sherry, the militant cyclist, and that was really quite a shock to the system. And you do feel very vulnerable and fragile on a bike. It's not a great state of affairs, and this country is suffering from a massive lack of investment in infrastructure. We're overpopulated. We've got very limited space, and we seem to have limited funds, and we seem to have, angry people on both sides. So I do cycle, but only on country lanes. I would never dream of cycling in a city, because it's not safe. But if you go to France or somewhere like that, cycling is really popular. It's really healthy, and cyclists are safe because they're kept in designated areas most of the time. There's a mutual respect that exists with cyclists and other forms of transport. It's the complete opposite here, and we need to remove that. We need to change it, and so all parts need to play a part.
Just finally, Nick, while I have you, a suggestion that's coming from 2 different people, actually, Josie in Sheffield and also Tony the trucker. Josie saying, Simon, regarding cyclists, I don't drive or cycle, but I definitely do think there should be a law that cyclists should wear high-vis clothing, especially when on the roads at night. Yeah. Tony the trucker says the same as a solution. How about making it a legislation that cyclists have to wear high-vis, but also with their reg number on? 2 benefits. You can see their reflective strips, and you can also identify them.
Absolutely. Well, I've actually suggested to the government that they have high-vis jackets at all times with a registered tabard, and we're wrestling with which is more prominent. Is it a registered tabard, or is it actually something affixed to the bike that the public can see? And I would also have mandatory use of helmets. All these things are designed. We have to, as a car driver, you have to have your seatbelt on, don't you? It's to make you safer. It does. There are huge benefits. And so for me, absolutely right. I agree with both of your listeners.
Nick, you put your point across very clearly. Thank you very much. Lawyer Nick Freeman speaking to me on BBC Radio Sheffield. Almost